The coffee mug slipped from Samuel Creek's fingers. It clattered against the porch steps, spilling the dark liquid across the weathered wood. In the quiet of the Montana morning, the sound was as loud as a gunshot. But it wasn't the sound that made him drop his coffee. It was the noise that came from the corral, a sound he'd never heard before. His donkey, Gus, was crying. It wasn't a bray. It wasn't a snort. It was a heartbroken, gut-wrenching sob that sliced through the crisp October air. The year was 1862, and Samuel figured this was just one more piece of bad luck to stack on the pile. 3 years. 3 long winters since he'd run from St. Louis with nothing but the clothes on his back and a brand of shame seared onto his soul. He could still see his brother, William, standing in that courtroom, pointing a finger, his own flesh and blood, swearing on a Bible that Samuel had stolen cattle from their own family. The judge's gavel came down like a hammer on an anvil, shattering his life, forcing him out into the wilderness alone. Now, at 41, Samuel's only companions were the endless sky and the animals he talked to like people. Most folks in the valley thought he was touched in the head, but animals were better than people. They didn't lie. They didn't cheat. They didn't stab you in the back when you weren't looking. The crying sound came again, sharp and desperate. It pulled him from the bitter past and into the strange present. He wiped his hands on his worn denim and stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The air was so cold it could freeze the words in your throat, but today felt different. There was a hum in the air, a strange energy he couldn't place. Gus was standing by the old fence post at the far end of the corral. His gray head was bowed low to the ground. His ears twitched, flicking back and forth as if listening to a secret conversation happening just beneath the dirt. As Samuel got closer, he saw it. The earth around Gus's hooves was torn up, dug out into a shallow, messy pit. "What's gotten into you, old friend?" Samuel's voice was gentle, but his mind was racing. This wasn't just a new behavior. It had been happening for a week straight. Every single morning, Gus would eat his oats, drink his water, and march directly to this one spot. He'd ignore fresh hay, sweet apples, everything. He just had to get back to this corner of the corral. Samuel knelt beside the hole Gus was digging. He ran his fingers through the soil. It was soft, loose. That didn't make any sense. This corner of the corral got the most sun and the least water. The ground here should be baked as hard as a brick. But it wasn't. It felt disturbed, like someone had already been digging here not long ago. The donkey nudged his shoulder with its soft nose, then looked back at the hole, its big brown eyes pleading. Gus was trying to tell him something important. But what could it possibly be? A cold wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the first sharp scent of snow. Winter was coming early this year. He could feel it deep in his bones. He had chores to do, a barn to patch, cattle to move. He didn't have time for a donkey's strange obsession. But as he tried to stand up, Gus did something he'd never done before. He planted his hooves squarely in front of the hole and refused to let Samuel leave. The animal wasn't just digging anymore. He was guarding something. The sun climbed higher, a pale disk in the vast Montana sky, but Gus hadn't moved an inch. He was a statue carved from stubbornness, his eyes fixed on that patch of disturbed earth. Samuel had tried everything. He'd brought out the sweetest apples from his cellar, the ones he saved for special occasions. He'd even offered a bucket of molasses treats, the one thing Gus could never resist. The donkey just sniffed them, then turned his head back to the hole, as if to say, "Not now. This is more important." "This is pure foolishness," Samuel muttered to himself, grabbing his shovel from the barn. He was talking to a donkey, letting an animal dictate his day. But the whimper that escaped Gus's throat twisted something in Samuel's chest. In 3 years of quiet companionship, Gus had been his rock. A calm, steady presence in a world that had thrown him away. He'd never seen the animal distressed, not once. This wasn't just strange behavior. Something was wrong. His curiosity finally boiled over, scalding his practicality. He marched back to the corral, the shovel resting on his shoulder, his face set with determination. "All right, you stubborn creature," he announced. "You win. We're going to figure this out, once and for all." The moment the words left his mouth, Gus stepped aside. He moved with a purpose, clearing a path to the hole as if he'd been waiting for Samuel to finally come to his senses. His ears perked up, and he let out a soft sound, a rumble of approval deep in his chest. Samuel just shook his head, a weary smile touching his lips. Maybe he was going crazy after all, believing his donkey could understand him. He plunged the shovel into the soft earth. The first scoop came up easy, revealing soil that was darker, richer than the surrounding dirt. He frowned. It looked like the soil from the riverbed, not the dry, dusty earth of his corral. That was impossible. He hadn't brought any new soil onto his land. He'd owned this ranch for 3 years, and before him, it had been empty for decades. No one had touched this ground. So why was it different? He dug deeper. With each shovel full, Gus grew more agitated. The donkey started pacing in a tight circle around the hole, his hooves drumming a frantic rhythm on the packed ground. His quiet companion was vibrating with an energy that was starting to feel contagious. Samuel's own heart began to beat a little faster, a strange mix of confusion and anticipation churning in his gut. "What's got you so worked up?" Samuel grunted, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. Animals were supposed to be simple. They needed food, water, shelter. They didn't get obsessed with random patches of dirt. They didn't lead their owners on mysterious treasure hunts. It just didn't happen. And then it did. 2 feet down, his shovel hit something hard. It wasn't the dull thud of a rock. It was a sharp, metallic clang that echoed across the silent ranch. The sound shot up the wooden handle of the shovel and into Samuel's bones. In that same instant, Gus threw his head back and let out a triumphant bray, a sound so loud and joyous it could have been heard all the way down in the valley. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped the shovel and fell to his knees, clawing at the dirt with his bare hands. His fingers, trembling, brushed against the cold, unmistakable corner of a metal box. His hands shook as he worked, scraping away the dark soil. The box was small, maybe the size of a loaf of bread, but it was heavy. It was made of a dark metal, now covered in a green patina of age. A thick, rusted padlock held the lid shut. And across its surface, nearly obscured by dirt and corrosion, were strange markings. They looked like letters, initials etched into the metal long, long ago. Gus nudged his shoulder again, this time more insistently. The donkey's eyes seemed to glitter with an emotion Samuel could have sworn was satisfaction, as if he'd just finished the most important job of his life. Samuel sat back on his heels, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stared at the box, then at his donkey, then back at the box. Who buried this here? And why? How in God's name had his donkey known exactly where to dig? 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, but one was louder than all the rest. What was he supposed to do now? Samuel's muscles burned as the shovel bit deeper and deeper into the Montana earth. But he didn't feel the pain. Something else was buzzing through his veins, an electric current of hope he hadn't felt since before St. Louis. Gus stood guard beside the growing hole, a furry sentinel, his dark eyes never leaving Samuel's work. The morning sun was climbing, painting the ranch in a golden light that made everything feel new again. "You picked one heck of a spot to get curious about, old friend," Samuel panted, pausing to wipe a streak of dirt from his forehead. The hole was deep now, so deep he had to hop down into it to keep digging. Each shovelful brought up that same dark, rich soil, the kind that hadn't seen the sun in a generation. His hands, calloused and tough from years of ranch work, were starting to blister inside his worn leather gloves. Suddenly Gus let out another bray, not his usual lazy morning call, but a sharp, urgent sound that cracked the morning quiet. The donkey paced around the rim of the hole, his hooves making quick, frantic clicks on the hard-packed ground. Samuel had never, ever seen him like this. In 3 years of shared silence, Gus had been calm, steady, almost sleepy. Now the animal was practically vibrating with an energy that made Samuel's own heart pound in his chest. "What is it? What's got you so worked up?" Samuel asked. But even as the words left his lips, he felt it. The shovel struck something that wasn't dirt. It wasn't rock. It was a loud, resonant clang of metal on metal that sent a jolt all the way up to his shoulders. A chill, cold and sharp, raced down his spine despite the sweat on his back. He dropped to his knees, his hands tearing at the soil. His fingers, numb with adrenaline, traced the hard, straight edges of what felt like a metal box. It was rectangular, about the size of a small suitcase, and far heavier than it had any right to be. Green stains, the color of time and damp earth, covered its surface. He gripped the sides, his muscles straining as he lifted it from its earthen tomb. Whatever this was, it had been waiting for him. It had been waiting for a very long time. Gus leaned over the edge of the hole, his wet nose almost touching Samuel's shoulder. He let out a soft, satisfied snort, a puff of warm air against Samuel's cold skin. Samuel climbed out, the mysterious box clutched to his chest like a newborn child. His legs were shaking, but not from exhaustion. A stampede of questions raced through his mind. Who put this here? When? And the most impossible question of all, how had Gus known? The box felt strangely warm against his shirt, as if it held not just objects, but a lingering spark of life. A small padlock, green with age but still solid, held its secrets locked away. Samuel stared at it, his mind struggling to catch up with reality. A week ago, he was just a lonely man talking to his animals. Now, he held a puzzle box in his hands, a box that might hold the answers to questions he didn't even know he should be asking. "Well, Gus," he said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I guess we better find out what treasure you've been guarding all this time." The small kitchen of his cabin had never felt so confining. Samuel placed the heavy box on the simple wooden table, pushing aside the cold plate of beans he'd forgotten about hours ago. The morning light streamed through the single window, glinting off the corroded metal, making the box look like something ancient and powerful, something pulled from one of the fairy tales his mother used to read to him. Gus had followed him inside, something the donkey never did. He stood in the doorway, a silent observer, his intelligent brown eyes watching Samuel's every move. Samuel's hands trembled as he rummaged through a drawer of old tools, searching for something, anything, strong enough to break the lock. The metal was soft with age, but the mechanism inside was stubborn, clinging to its secrets. "Here goes nothing," Samuel whispered. He placed the tip of a chisel against the lock's rusted shackle. He raised a hammer. The first strike sent a jarring ring through the silent cabin. The second strike dented the metal. The third, careful and precise, finally broke it. The ancient lock snapped open with a satisfying crack, a sound that seemed to echo with decades of buried silence. He set his tools down. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then, slowly, he lifted the heavy lid. Inside, wrapped in layers of what looked like oiled leather, were several bundles of papers, tied with faded red ribbon. And beneath them, tucked into a corner, was a small cloth pouch. It clinked with the heavy, unmistakable sound of gold coins. Samuel's heart was hammering so hard against his ribs he was sure Gus could hear it from across the room. With fingers that felt clumsy and foreign, he lifted out the first bundle. He carefully untied the ribbon, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the simple knot. He unrolled the papers. They were covered in a familiar, careful script. Handwriting he would recognize anywhere. It was his father's. The same elegant loops and steady lines that had filled the margins of the family Bible, the same script that had taught him how to read. But these weren't farm ledgers or Bible verses. The first document he unrolled made the air rush from his lungs. It was a land deed, dated 1858. It bore his father's clear signature and described, in perfect detail, the exact boundaries of the very ranch where Samuel now stood. But that was impossible. His father had sold this land before he died. That's what William had told him. William had sworn their father was drowning in debt, that everything had to be sold to keep the family name from being dragged through the mud. It was a lie. It had all been a lie. Here, in his hands, was the proof. Jonas Creek had owned this land until the day he died, 4 years ago. He fumbled for another paper, a letter addressed to him in his father's steady hand. The date at the top made his vision swim. It was dated just 1 week before his father's final illness took him. The words seemed to leap off the page, grabbing him by the throat. My dear son Samuel, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am no longer here to tell you the truth myself. Gus stepped closer, his warm breath a comforting presence on Samuel's shoulder, as if the donkey knew, as if he understood the weight of this moment. Samuel's voice cracked as he read the next line aloud, the words tasting like ashes and miracles in his mouth. I never sold this ranch, boy. I kept it for you. I kept it, knowing that someday you'd need a place to call home when the world turned hard. The letter continued. The deed is buried, where we used to count the stars on summer nights, waiting for the day you'd be ready to find it. Samuel's eyes were too full of tears to read anymore. His father had known. Somehow his father had foreseen the betrayal, the lies, the lonely exile. He had left his son this land, this legacy, this proof, this gift of a place to belong. And somehow, impossibly, Gus had known exactly where to dig. Heavy hoofbeats pounded against the dry Montana earth. The sound was like war drums, a sudden, violent intrusion into the sacred silence of his discovery. Samuel looked up from the papers spread across his kitchen table, his heart plummeting from the heavens back into the dust. 5 horsemen were cresting the ridge above his small ranch. The lead rider wore a silver star that glinted in the morning sun. Sheriff Morrison. And riding right beside him, his face a thundercloud of grim purpose, was the one man on earth Samuel never wanted to see again. His brother, William. Hide everything, Gus, Samuel whispered, his voice tight. The donkey, still standing in the doorway, seemed to understand immediately. His ears flattened, and a low rumble started in his chest. With hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, Samuel scrambled to gather the precious documents. The deed, the letters, the pouch of gold coins. He shoved them all back into the metal strongbox and pushed it deep into his bedroom closet, behind a stack of old blankets. The riders dismounted with an unnerving synchronicity, their boots hitting the ground like a death sentence. Samuel pulled his front door open before they could even knock, schooling his features into a mask of calm he was far from feeling. His mouth was as dry as a desert riverbed. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat, a gesture of politeness that felt like a mockery. William didn't even look at him. "Morning, Samuel," the sheriff said, his voice carrying the flat weight of official business. "We've got a situation here that needs sorting out." "What kind of situation?" Samuel asked, though a cold dread was already coiling in his stomach. He knew. William finally looked at him, his jaw set like stone. "The kind where a man has been squatting on land that doesn't belong to him. Again." That one word, again, hit Samuel like a physical blow. It was meant to. It was a deliberate, cruel jab, designed to bring back the shame of St. Louis, the courtroom, the accusations, the lies. Samuel's hands, hidden at his sides, clenched into tight fists. "This is my land, William. I've been working it for 3 years. "Working stolen land," one of the other men sneered from behind the sheriff. Samuel recognized him as Pete Jenkins, the owner of the general store in town, a notorious gossip and a man who enjoyed other people's misfortune. "My cousin's been looking to buy this property, but there's no clear title on record down at the territorial office." Sheriff Morrison pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "That's the problem, Samuel. The official records show this land as unclaimed. No deed, no registration, no owner. If you can't provide proof of ownership, son, we're going to have to ask you to pack your things and move along." The world tilted on its axis. Just moments ago, he had been holding that proof in his hands. He had discovered a legacy, a gift from his father. Now, his own brother, the architect of his first ruin, was here to orchestrate a second. The bitter irony was a fire in his throat. "I need some time," Samuel said, his voice barely a whisper. "Time for what?" William shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. "Time to forge more documents? Like you did before?" The accusation hung in the still morning air, ugly and venomous. And in that moment, something inside Samuel snapped. The quiet, long-suffering patience he had cultivated for 3 years, the temper he had buried deep beneath layers of grief and solitude, began to rise like floodwaters behind a cracking dam. Gus moved from the doorway to stand at his side, a solid, reassuring presence. The donkey's warmth gave him a strength he didn't know he still had. "I was cleared of those charges," Samuel said, his voice low and steady, but gaining power with each word. "And I can prove this land is mine." Sheriff Morrison raised a skeptical eyebrow. "How's that, Samuel?" "Because we've looked everywhere for the paperwork. It doesn't exist." Samuel's gaze flickered to Gus and then to the corral. He remembered the donkey's frantic digging, the impossible discovery. Sometimes the most important truths weren't found in an office. They were hidden in the last place anyone would ever think to look. His father had been clever, cunning. But would a story about a treasure-hunting donkey be enough to save him? He had to try. He looked the sheriff dead in the eye. The proof was buried. The men stared at him. Their faces shifted from doubt to confusion to outright disbelief. Pete Jenkins let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Buried treasure? What is this, Samuel? Some kind of children's fairy tale?" But Sheriff Morrison didn't laugh. He held up a hand for silence, his sharp, experienced eyes studying Samuel's face, searching for a lie. "Explain yourself, son." Samuel pointed a trembling finger toward the corral, where the freshly disturbed earth was still a dark scar on the ground. "My donkey. He spent a whole week digging in that one spot. I thought he'd lost his mind. But this morning I helped him. We found a metal box. A box my father buried before he died." He watched William's face. At the mention of their father, all the color drained from it, leaving it as pale and stark as a winter snowfield. Father never said anything about burying papers. "Father said a lot of things you never chose to listen to," Samuel retorted, a new, surprising boldness ringing in his voice. For years, he had swallowed the blame, worn the shame like a heavy coat. But not anymore. Not today. Standing here with the truth tucked away in his closet, something had shifted deep inside him. The ground beneath his feet felt solid for the first time in years. "Show us," Sheriff Morrison commanded. He swung down from his horse with the easy, fluid motion of a man born in the saddle. The other men followed suit, their curiosity now overriding their scorn. Samuel turned and walked back into his cabin. He retrieved the strongbox from its hiding place. His hands were steady now. The weight of the box felt different. It no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like his future. He carried it out onto the porch and set it on the weathered wooden rail for all to see. With a deep breath, he lifted the lid. The creak of the old hinges sounded like a door opening to a whole new life. The papers were exactly as he'd left them, his father's careful handwriting still perfectly clear after 4 long years in the dark. Sheriff Morrison picked up the deed first. He held it up to the light, his brow furrowed in concentration as he examined the paper, the ink, the seal. The other men crowded around, peering over his shoulder, their earlier mockery forgotten. Samuel didn't watch them. He watched William. He saw the flicker of recognition in his brother's eyes, the slow, dawning horror as he recognized the unmistakable signature. That's Father's signature," William whispered, his voice hollow, stripped of all its earlier aggression. "I'd know it anywhere." The sheriff nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "This deed is dated 1858, properly signed, properly witnessed. According to this document, Jonas Creek purchased this land from the territorial government, and he designated it to pass directly to his eldest son, Samuel Creek, upon his death." "But that's impossible," Pete Jenkins protested, his face red with frustration. "My cousin checked every record in the book. There's no mention of any Creek family owning this property. It's listed as unclaimed." Samuel reached into the box and pulled out one of his father's letters. He unfolded it carefully, the old paper crinkling in the quiet air. "Listen to this," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. He began to read aloud. "Samuel, I know the world has been hard on you, but sometimes the most valuable things must be hidden from those who would steal them. I've kept this deed a secret, buried where we used to count the stars on summer nights. The territorial office has a copy, son, but it's filed under a different name, a name I created to protect it from your brother's gambling debts." The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken only by the cold wind whistling through the fence posts. Every man, even Pete Jenkins, was staring at William. Samuel looked from face to face, watching the truth finally dawn in their expressions. He had been telling the truth. The impossible story was real. William, his face ashen, finally spoke, his voice barely a choked whisper. What name did Father use?" For the first time in 3 years, a genuine smile touched Samuel's lips. It felt strange, like using a muscle he'd forgotten he had. "Creek's End Ranch," he said, letting the words hang in the air. "Owned by J. Samuel Creek. He used both our names, William. He never gave up on either of his sons." Sheriff Morrison took the letter, his weathered hands treating the paper like a holy relic. He compared the signature to the one on the deed. He examined the territorial seal embossed on the corner of the document. Finally, he looked up, and for the first time, Samuel saw something other than suspicion in the lawman's eyes. It was respect. "These appear genuine to me," the sheriff declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The signatures match other documents I've seen from Jonas Creek. And this seal, this is authentic. Your father was a smart man, Samuel. A very smart man, hiding his assets this way." Pete Jenkins and the other men began to shuffle awkwardly back toward their horses, their purpose for being here utterly defeated. Their posse had crumbled into a group of embarrassed-looking neighbors. But William didn't move. He remained rooted to the spot, a man turned to stone in the middle of the dusty yard, staring at his older brother with eyes that held a universe of regret. "Samuel," he said quietly, his voice cracking. I need to tell you something. Something about what really happened in St. Louis." The morning sun painted gold streaks across the Montana sky as William's horse appeared on the ridge again. It had been 3 months since that fateful confrontation. 3 months of strained letters, awkward apologies, and the slow, fragile rebuilding of a bridge that had been burned to ashes. But this time, William wasn't alone. Samuel watched from his porch as his brother rode down the slope, accompanied by a woman on a gentle mare and 2 small children on a pony. His heart, a muscle he thought had hardened into stone, gave a painful lurch. William was bringing his family. He was bringing them to meet the uncle they never knew they had. The little girl, her hair in 2 bouncing pigtails, waved wildly as they approached. Her older brother, maybe 6 or 7, clutched the saddle horn with white knuckles, but he offered Samuel a shy, tentative smile. And in that moment, Samuel felt something inside him crack open. A wall he had meticulously built around his heart for 3 long years began to crumble, brick by painful brick. "Martha, children, this is my brother Samuel," William said as they dismounted. His voice was thick with an emotion Samuel couldn't quite place. His wife, Martha, was prettier than he had imagined, with kind, steady eyes that reminded him so much of their mother. She stepped forward without hesitation, her hand outstretched. "We've heard so much about you," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "William has told us everything. About the ranch, about your wonderful donkey, about everything." Her words carried no judgment, no accusation, only a quiet acceptance that felt like a balm on an old wound. The children, however, had only one thing on their minds. They made a beeline for the corral where Gus stood watching, his ears perked with curiosity. "Can we pet him, please?" the little girl Emma asked, her eyes wide with a wonder that felt contagious. Samuel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He led them over to the fence, and as Gus lowered his big, gentle head for their eager scratches, Samuel noticed William hanging back, his face clouded with a familiar trouble. "Something eating at you, brother?" Samuel asked quietly, while the children's delighted giggles filled the air. William kicked at a loose stone, sending a puff of dust into the air. "The truth is, Samuel, I didn't just come for a social visit. There's been talk in town. Again. Samuel's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. The deed is legal. Sheriff Morrison confirmed it himself. I know that, and you know that, William replied, his eyes dark with worry. But you know how people are when they want something. Some of the big cattle ranchers, the ones who run this valley, they're saying you don't belong up here. They want this land for winter grazing. The old familiar feeling of being an outsider, of having to fight for what was rightfully his, crept back in. They have no right. They're saying you're just one man, with one donkey, William continued, the words coming out in a rush. They're saying you can't possibly work all this land properly, that it's going to waste. Just then, Martha approached, the children trailing behind her, their hands full of grass they were offering to a very content-looking Gus. She placed a hand on her husband's arm. William, you promised we'd talk about this together, she said firmly, a silent message passing between them. Talk about what? Samuel asked, sensing there was more to this visit than a simple family reunion. Martha looked from William's troubled face to Samuel's questioning one. She took a deep breath. We want to move up here, Samuel. William, he lost his job at the town mill last month. We thought maybe we could help you. Help you run this ranch. We could be partners. A real family. Samuel was stunned into silence. After 3 years of perfect, unbroken solitude, the idea of sharing his space, his life, was both thrilling and terrifying. You'd want to live up here? It's rough country. The winters are brutal. We're not afraid of hard work, Martha said, her chin held high. And the children need this. They need fresh air and room to grow. Besides, she added, a warm smile spreading across her face, someone needs to help you take proper care of this remarkable donkey of yours. Emma, the little girl, tugged on Samuel's sleeve. Uncle Samuel? She whispered, her voice full of childish conspiracy. Gus whispered something in my ear. Samuel knelt down to her level, a smile playing on his lips despite the turmoil in his mind. Oh, he did? And what did he say? He said he's been lonely too, she said with perfect seriousness. But now he's happy. Because there are more friends to play with. The little girl's innocent words struck Samuel with the force of a lightning bolt. Even his donkey, his simple, stubborn donkey, understood the one truth he had been too proud and too wounded to admit to himself. Life wasn't meant to be lived alone. William cleared his throat, his gaze steady and serious now. Those ranchers, they're planning to meet with the territorial governor next month. They're going to petition to have your land claim reviewed. They'll argue you're not developing the property, that it's underutilized. Samuel looked at his brother, then at Martha and the children. He looked at the vast, empty land stretching out around his small cabin, and he finished William's thought for him. But if we were working it together, as a family operation, they wouldn't have a case. He imagined it. The sound of children's laughter echoing off the hills, the bustle of a real home, the sight of smoke curling from an expanded chimney. It was a life he thought he had lost forever. Gus, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, ambled over and nudged Samuel's shoulder with his nose, a gentle push in the right direction. Samuel looked at his brother, the man who had wronged him so terribly, and saw not a traitor, but a man trying to find his way back home. He looked at his family, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he had one. Yes, Samuel said, the single word feeling heavier and more important than any he had ever spoken. Yes, let's do this together. 2 years later, in the green spring of 1864, Samuel Creek stood in the exact spot where Gus had first started digging. But the world around him was unrecognizable. The small, lonely corral now held 3 sturdy horses, 2 fat milk cows, and Gus, who had graciously appointed himself the official supervisor of all ranch activities. Children's laughter, a sound as sweet as birdsong, echoed from the cabin, which had been expanded with a new wing to house William's growing family. The ranch, once a quiet testament to one man's solitude, was now a bustling, thriving homestead. Uncle Samuel, come quick! 8-year-old Tommy came tearing across the yard, his face flushed with the kind of excitement only a child can muster. Gus is doing it again. He's doing that digging thing, but in a totally different spot. A wide grin spread across Samuel's face. He followed his nephew over to the far end of the new vegetable garden, and sure enough, there was Gus, carefully pawing at the soft earth near the fence line. But this time, Samuel felt no confusion, no alarm, only a deep, abiding curiosity. Over the past 2 years, they had all learned that Gus possessed a strange and wonderful talent. The donkey had an uncanny knack for finding things. He'd located lost tools buried in the snow, pinpointed the perfect spot to dig a new well, and had even led them to a nest of orphaned baby rabbits that would have perished without his intervention. "What do you suppose he's found now?" Martha asked, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron as she joined them. In her arms, she held baby Rose, the newest addition to the Creek family, born just last winter. "Only one way to find out," Samuel said, grabbing his shovel from its resting place against the barn wall. The whole family gathered around, a small, curious crowd, as Samuel began to dig where Gus indicated. The earth was soft and easy to turn, but this time, his shovel didn't strike the hard clang of metal. Instead, he felt a dull, scraping thud against something smooth and curved. "It's pottery," Emma squealed with delight as Samuel carefully brushed the dirt away, revealing the side of a small, intricately decorated clay jar. He lifted it gently from the earth. It was ancient, the patterns worn smooth by time. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be a waterproof leather pouch, they found a collection of remarkable objects. 3 perfectly crafted arrowheads made of black obsidian, a string of beautiful blue and white beads, and a piece of carved bone covered in markings that none of them could read. "Native artifacts," William said, his voice hushed with a sudden reverence. Samuel held the carved bone in his palm, feeling the weight of its history. This must have been important to someone, very important. And in that moment, a deep understanding flooded through him, a sense of clarity as pure as the mountain air. These aren't ours to keep. We should return them. We need to take these to the tribal elders down in the valley. That afternoon, Samuel and William saddled their horses and rode down to the small native settlement that lay nestled in the river bend. They were greeted with caution, but when they explained their purpose, they were led to the lodge of Chief Running Bear, a dignified man with sharp, intelligent eyes and braids streaked with silver. The chief examined the artifacts with a profound stillness, his weathered fingers tracing the patterns on the clay jar. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening with an emotion that transcended time. These belonged to my grandfather's grandfather," the chief said, his voice low and thick with feeling. "They were sacred to our family. They were buried here for safekeeping when the soldiers came many, many years ago. We searched for them. But the land had changed. We had given up all hope of ever seeing them again." "Gus knew where to look," Samuel explained, feeling a little foolish. "Our donkey, he has a way of finding things that matter." A slow, knowing smile spread across Chief Running Bear's face. "Animals often understand the heart of the world better than men do. Your donkey has not just found clay and stone. He has given my people back a piece of our soul. This is a great gift you have given us today." As they prepared to leave, the chief placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect and friendship. "You and your family are welcome in this village, always. You have shown yourselves to be good neighbors, men with generous hearts. The spirits have blessed you with a wise companion." Riding home in the golden light of the setting sun, Samuel felt a sense of peace he had never known. The threat from the cattle ranchers had long since faded away. When they saw the Creek family, united and determined, successfully working the land, their petitions and complaints had dried up. The ranch now produced enough hay, vegetables, and Martha's now famous cheese to supply half the valley. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. "You know what I think?" William said, breaking the comfortable silence as they approached their home. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys into the twilight sky, and the sound of children's voices carried on the gentle evening breeze. "What's that?" "I think Gus didn't just find Father's deed by accident that day," William said, his voice thoughtful. "I think somehow he knew. He knew you needed more than just a piece of land. You needed a family, you needed a purpose, you needed a reason to trust again." Samuel reached over and patted Gus's sturdy neck as the donkey trotted faithfully beside his horse. "Maybe you're right, brother. Or maybe he just really, really likes to dig holes." Both men laughed, the sound easy and familiar. But as Samuel looked at the warm lights of his home, at the family that now filled its walls, he knew William was closer to the truth. In the Montana Territory of 1864, Samuel Creek had finally learned that the greatest treasures aren't always buried in the ground. Sometimes they are found in the simple, terrifying courage it takes to let others in, to let them stand beside you, and to let them help you dig. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of mystery and unexpected discoveries.